Two bottles, nearly identical water. One costs about 2,000 times more than the other. For years, you were told that was the smart choice. Then one company took that confidence a little too far. They flew water in from a tropical island and got cocky enough to mock a Midwestern city's tap water in a national ad. So the city tested it. The island water lost. For most of the 20th century, Americans didn't think much about water at all. It came out of the tap, and after chlorination and filtration spread through the 1930s and 40s, the waterborne epidemics that once killed thousands of Americans a year, typhoid, cholera, had all but disappeared. By the time the Safe Drinking Water Act passed in 1974, tap water in the US was one of the most tightly regulated products in the country, tested constantly and paid for by your city, not by you. You could see that confidence in the architecture. Water fountains sat in every school hallway, every park, every courthouse. They weren't a luxury, they were a promise. This water is safe, and it's free, because it belongs to everyone. For a stretch of the 20th century, drinking straight from a public fountain was genuinely more common than buying water in a bottle. Walt, a mechanic from Ohio, still remembers the metal cup chained to the fountain outside his elementary school gym. Cold water, faintly metallic, shared by 400 kids a day, and nobody thought twice about it. Those fountains carried more weight than people gave them credit for, too. For decades, they'd been one of the few genuinely public things in American life. No ticket, no membership, no line item on anyone's budget except the city's. It's part of why the whites-only fountain signs of the segregated South were so specifically ugly. They took something built on the idea that water belongs to everyone and drew a line through it. Back then, bottled water had a different reputation entirely. It was a luxury import. Perrier in its green glass, Evian from the French Alps, an affectation for people who wanted to seem sophisticated at dinner parties. Nobody bought it because they were afraid of the tap. That idea hadn't been invented yet. But sometime in the late 1970s, that started to shift. Not because the water got worse, because the story about the water did. A handful of beverage companies discovered something. If you could make people a little afraid of what came out of their own faucet, you didn't have to sell them water. You had to sell them safety. Through the 1970s and 80s, bottled water marketing leaned hard into that fear. Vague warnings about aging pipes, industrial runoff, what's really in your water. And the fear wasn't completely made up. There were real contamination scares at public fountains in this era. But researchers at the Pacific Institute later went back and looked closely at those cases and found something the marketing never mentioned. The actual illness risk rarely came from the water itself. It came from old, poorly maintained plumbing sitting behind the fountain. The same kind of aging infrastructure problem that, decades later, would surface again in Flint, Michigan. The fountain wasn't the danger, the pipe feeding it was. That distinction didn't make it into a single ad campaign. It worked well enough that by 1999, the Natural Resources Defense Council tested more than 1,000 bottles across 103 brands, looking for proof the fear was justified. What they found was messier than that. Bottled water wasn't reliably cleaner than tap, and about a third of the brands tested exceeded state limits for contaminants in at least one sample, contaminants the tap water down the street didn't even have. The fear had outrun the evidence. Walt wouldn't have known any of these numbers back then. Almost nobody did. And then the biggest twist arrived. The companies selling sugary drinks realized they didn't need a new product. They already had one flowing through almost every American home. By the 1990s, the soda giants noticed the same cultural shift happening to their own industry. Sugar was becoming a liability, and water was becoming a lifestyle. In 1994, PepsiCo launched Aquafina, reverse osmosis filtered municipal water, repackaged as Purity. 5 years later, Coca-Cola answered with Dasani, running the identical playbook. Take tap water, strip it down, add a pinch of minerals back in for taste, and bottle it to look like it came from somewhere untouched. Neither company buried this forever in fine print. Neither put it on the front label either. The water in the bottle and the water in the sink were, chemically, cousins. The only thing that had changed was the story wrapped around them. Walt still couldn't have named a specific brand. He'd just started reading labels a little closer, without really knowing why. Here's the part that's easy to miss. The industry didn't just need you to doubt your tap. It needed you to forget it was free. And for about a decade, that story held together, right up until one of those companies tried selling it in a country that still trusted its pipes. In late January 2004, Coca-Cola launched Dasani in the United Kingdom, backing the rollout with a £7 million marketing budget. British reporters did what American shoppers mostly hadn't. They asked where the water actually came from. The answer: municipal tap water from Sidcup in southeast London, run through reverse osmosis, landed badly in a country where spring water still meant an actual spring. Coca-Cola called the process sophisticated. The public wasn't convinced anything needed to be sophisticated about water that came out of a faucet down the street. Then, in March 2004, it got worse. Routine testing at the bottling plant found bromate, a byproduct of the mineral adding process, at levels the UK's Food Standards Agency classified as illegal, a chemical capable of raising long-term cancer risk with sustained exposure. Coca-Cola recalled roughly 500,000 bottles, with most of the stock pulled from shelves within a day, and withdrew Dasani from Britain for good, shelving planned launches in France and Germany along the way. A company that had spent a fortune convincing people treated tap water deserved a premium price tag had just been forced to publicly admit its own treatment had failed. Would you have caught that from the label? Walt heard about it secondhand, from a coworker joking over lunch that the fancy water everyone was buying had turned out to be tap water that went wrong. It was a small joke, but it stuck with him for years, a crack in an assumption he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. 2 decades later, that pattern hasn't gone away. It's just gotten quieter. Independent testing and the company's own disclosures suggest a majority of major purified bottled water brands, Aquafina and Dasani included, start out as ordinary tap water. PepsiCo even added the words public water source to Aquafina's label back in 2007, after years of pressure. The global bottled water industry is now worth more than $300 billion a year. Some of that story got even more absurd. Fiji water travels roughly 5,500 miles, close to 9,000 kilometers, from a bottling plant on a Pacific island to store shelves in Los Angeles. And somewhere in that trip, it still gets marketed as the cleaner, purer choice. In 2006, Fiji leaned into that image hard enough to run a magazine ad joking that its label said Fiji because it's not bottled in Cleveland. Cleveland's water department, unamused, tested both. Fiji's bottle came back with measurable arsenic, within the legal limit, but measurable. Cleveland's tap water didn't. So which bottle would you have picked? Fiji's own president later admitted, only half joking, that they'd simply needed a city to pick on. Not everything on this shelf is fiction, though. Real mineral water, drawn from a protected spring, is a genuine, distinct product. Electrolyte water helps people sweating heavily for hours, not for a walk to the mailbox. Alkaline water, per the Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic, shows no proven benefit for a healthy person. And in 2017, Poland Spring, labeled 100% natural spring water, faced a class action lawsuit claiming its source was groundwater near old landfills. The company denies wrongdoing, and the case is still in court. None of that has stopped Walt from keeping a case of water in his garage for road trips. He's not against the bottle, he just doesn't buy the story anymore. And he's not alone. More cities are installing refill stations instead of tearing fountains out. Home filters, once a fringe purchase, are now a normal line on a grocery list. Reusable bottles, unheard of at the height of the bottled water boom, are now the thing people actually carry to the gym. Here's what actually changed between the fountain outside Walt's old gym and the shelf he stands in front of now. Mostly, not the water, the story around it. A public resource that used to need no explanation got quietly replaced by a private product that needed constant reassurance, and somewhere in that swap, most of us stopped asking why we were paying for it at all. You don't have to boycott a bottle to opt out of the story, you just have to know it's a story, and read the label before you believe it. Next time you're standing in that aisle, the choice is still yours. Buy the bottle if you want the convenience. That's a fair trade to make with your eyes open. refill it from the tap if you want your money back. Either way, you're no longer choosing based on the fear. You're choosing based on what you actually know. That's exactly the kind of quiet history Health Evolution TV keeps digging up, one label at a time.